On my 80th birthday, I was given diapers for the future. Everyone laughed until they cried. And the next day, I gave my family another gift. No one opened it out loud, but suddenly everyone fell silent. Stay with me until the very end to find out how the story ends. We look forward to your comments and thoughts on the story. I turned 80 on a Saturday. The house was full. Kids, grandkids, in-laws, neighbors who barely knew my name but came for the cake. Balloons floated near the ceiling, paper hats crinkled on heads that had long outgrown them, and a banner reading 80 and fabulous drooped slightly above the living room doorway. I smiled, I laughed. I thanked everyone, as expected. They served punch. They made a slideshow of old photos, me in a wedding dress, me holding my first baby, me in an apron in the kitchen, like every woman in those days. There was polite clapping, a few tears, then came the gifts. A quilt stitched by my youngest granddaughter, a scented candle, a framed collage, and then the box. It was wrapped in shiny gold paper with a large red bow. My son carried it in dramatically, grinning. "We all pitched in for this one," he said. I peeled the paper slowly, fingers trembling slightly. The room fell quiet in anticipation, the kind of silence that comes just before a punchline. Inside were adult diapers, a pack of them. "For the future," the label read, bright and bold. There was a moment of hesitation, a beat, before the laughter began, loud, echoing. My son laughed first, then his wife, then the others. Even my teenage grandson chuckled and looked away. I forced a smile. Someone clapped me gently on the back. "Just a joke, Mom," they said. "You know we love you." Yes, I knew. I sat there with the diapers in my lap while they returned to their cake and their chatter. No one noticed how still I became, or how quiet. I placed the box neatly beside the armchair, folded the wrapping paper, and rose to refill the punch. Later that night, when the house had emptied and the laughter had faded into silence, I stood alone in the hallway, staring at my reflection in the old mirror by the stairs. 80 years of living, 80 years of giving, sacrificing, holding things together. They gave me diapers. I turned out the light, but I didn't go to bed. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table and began to write something I hadn't planned, something they would never expect, because tomorrow I would give them a gift, too, and no one would be laughing. The sun rose quietly, as if it too was unsure whether to disturb the stillness of my house. I moved slower that morning, not from pain, not the physical kind at least, but from a weight in my chest that I couldn't quite shake. I made coffee the way I always did, strong, black, 2 sugars, the kind that reminded me I was still here, still sharp, still myself. Their laughter echoed faintly in my memory, not cruel exactly, just careless, thoughtless. That was always the worst kind. They didn't mean to humiliate me. That's what I told myself, over and over again. They didn't mean it, but intent doesn't always soften the sting. Sometimes it sharpens it. I opened the drawer beside the fridge and pulled out a small, dusty envelope I hadn't touched in years. It was cream-colored, hand-addressed in my cursive, sealed with a gold sticker I'd saved from a wedding invitation. I ran my thumb along the edge, remembering why I had sealed it in the first place. It was meant for someday. Yesterday it became today. I slipped the envelope into a small box. Nothing grand, just the kind people use for jewelry or keepsakes. I tied a satin ribbon around it, red like the one they used on the diaper box. A little poetry, I thought. It wasn't revenge. No, I don't believe in revenge. It was perspective. They had forgotten who I was, who I still am. I had been a daughter, a wife, a mother, a caretaker, a teacher, a fighter, a survivor. I had buried dreams and people. I had held hands through childbirth and through grief. I had kept secrets, carried burdens, forgiven the unforgivable, and done it all with grace. And yet yesterday I became a joke in my own story. Not anymore. By noon, I had placed the small box on the mantel in the living room. No card, no explanation, just a bow. They were all coming back today for leftovers, for gossip, for the second round of celebration. Let them open it. Let them decide who laughs this time. Because there is power in silence, and sometimes the quietest woman in the room writes the ending. By the time they arrived, the kitchen was already warm with the smell of baked apples and cinnamon. I had set the table, not out of obligation, but because it grounded me, a routine gesture in a world that had shifted under my feet just the day before. The house filled quickly again. Laughter returned, easy and unaware. My son kissed my cheek. My daughter-in-law commented on the pie. Grandkids draped themselves across couches like it was their right. None of them noticed the small box on the mantel at first. And why would they? It wasn't shiny. It didn't shout for attention. It simply sat there, quiet, wrapped in red, waiting. They didn't ask about the diapers. No apology, no acknowledgement. That was what stung the most. Not the gift itself, but the fact that no one thought it might have landed deeper than intended. No one thought that maybe, just maybe, I had heard the laughter long after it stopped. "Mom, you look lovely today," my son said as he passed through the kitchen. I gave him a polite smile. "I slept well," I replied. He didn't press further. We ate, talked, passed dishes around like always. I nodded and laughed when needed, filled glasses and refilled plates. I had done this my whole life, this performance of presence. Then my youngest granddaughter, bright-eyed, too young to understand subtle cruelty, pointed. "What's that?" she asked, looking toward the fireplace. Everyone turned. The box. "Oh," I said casually. "That's for all of you." There was a beat of confusion, then a ripple of intrigue. My daughter-in-law rose, wiped her hands on a napkin, and walked to the mantel. She took the box gently, examined it, then turned back to the table. "Should we open it?" she asked. I didn't answer. I simply watched. She untied the ribbon slowly, as if expecting something delicate inside. When she opened the lid and pulled out the envelope, her brow furrowed. "It's a letter." Her voice was different now. She glanced at the others, then back at me. "Should I read it?" I took a sip of my tea and said quietly, "Only if you're ready." And just like that, the room fell silent. She didn't read it aloud. She looked around the table once, caught my gaze, and something in it made her hesitate. Slowly, she folded the letter back into its envelope and placed it on the table in front of her, like it had started to radiate heat. My grandson, the loudest one, leaned over her shoulder. "What does it say?" Her reply was barely audible. "It's personal." He blinked. "But it's for all of us, right?" She didn't answer. Neither did I. My son reached for the letter, but his wife pulled it gently back. "Let's just give it a moment." They didn't know what to do with it now. It sat between them and the casserole dish, a plain envelope, a whisper in a room that used to be filled with noise. The children, my great-grandchildren, sensed it too. They stopped playing. The littlest one curled closer to her mother's side. No one understood exactly what had shifted, only that something had. I sat with my hands folded neatly in my lap. I wasn't angry. I wasn't smug. I was calm in a way I hadn't been in years, because they finally paused long enough to see me. No more jokes, no more eye rolls, no more calling me adorable like I was a lapdog in a sweater. For the first time in a long time, they didn't know what I was thinking. And that gave them pause. It gave me room. "Grandma," my daughter-in-law said slowly, was this about yesterday?" I tilted my head. "What was yesterday?" Her cheeks flushed. "The joke. The diapers." "Oh," I said lightly, that was just a gift, like this one." Silence again. She placed the letter carefully back in the box. "I'll read it later." My son cleared his throat. "Yeah, we'll all read it later." But they didn't eat much after that. The house felt full, but hollow, as if everyone were suddenly aware that their laughter had cost them something. When they left, each of them hugged me longer than usual, a little tighter. No jokes this time. The box was gone with them. But the message, that stayed. That night, the phone didn't ring. No thank you calls, no follow-up jokes, no love you, mom texts, just stillness, heavy and full, like a room after everyone's left, the smell of food lingering longer than the voices. I didn't mind the silence. I sat by the window with a blanket over my knees, a cup of chamomile cooling in my hand, and the moonlight stretching long across the floorboards. I imagined them in their homes. Sitting in their own kitchens, the letter between them now finally opened. I had started it like this. To the ones I gave my life to, thank you for celebrating my 80 years. But I wonder, do you remember who I am beneath the candles and cake? You laughed yesterday. Maybe it felt harmless. But when a woman turns 80, she is not just old. She is a collection of every moment you didn't see. The strength, the sacrifice, the silence. This letter isn't anger. It's a reminder, because I'm still here. And I'm watching how you choose to remember me. With love, always, Mom. It wasn't meant to punish them. I just needed them to pause, to see me not as a relic or a joke, but as the woman who raised them, who built the very table they now eat around. I didn't know if it would work, but when the knock came, soft, hesitant, just before midnight I knew. It was my son, alone. He held his coat in one hand, the letter in the other. I didn't know, he said, voice quiet. I didn't realize it hurt. I nodded, didn't speak. I'm sorry, Mom. He looked smaller than I remembered, not just older, smaller, as if the years had finally settled on him, too. I think we forgot you're still you. That, right there, was the gift I had hoped for. Not guilt, not apologies, just the truth finally spoken. He reached for my hand. I took it. And for a long moment we sat like that. The mother and the boy, both aged now, finally facing each other as equals. And I knew this story wasn't ending. It was just beginning. Again. The next morning, my son came by again. This time, he brought breakfast. Warm bagels still in the paper bag, and a bouquet of flowers that looked like he'd picked them out in a hurry. Lilies, my favorite. He hadn't remembered that in years. He didn't say much at first. Just set the bag on the counter and fussed with the coffee machine like he used to as a teenager, pretending he knew what he was doing. I watched from my usual seat at the table, letting the quiet stretch comfortably between us. Finally, he sat down across from me, rested his elbows on the table, and let out a long breath. I read your letter again, he said. Out loud, to the kids. I raised an eyebrow, surprised. They didn't get it at first, he admitted. They just kept asking what was wrong, why you were upset. But then my oldest, Sarah, she said, maybe Grandma's tired of being the family's joke. I felt something twist inside me, not pain, recognition. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small photo, a picture of me and him, taken decades ago. At a park, I think. I was in a sun hat squinting at the camera. He was maybe 9, clutching my arm like it was the most natural place in the world to be. She found this in one of my old boxes, he said. Said I used to look at you like you were made of gold. My throat tightened. I think I forgot how to do that, he whispered. He passed the photo across the table. I took it slowly, staring at the little boy in the picture. My boy, the one who used to bring me dandelions and tell me I was magic because I could make pancakes without measuring. You didn't forget, I said gently. You just stopped looking. He nodded, eyes glossy. That morning we didn't talk about diapers or laughter or shame. We just sat there, drinking coffee, sharing bagels, and breathing the same air. This time not as strangers in a family, but as family who had once forgotten each other. He kissed my forehead when he left, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was aging alone. 2 days later, Sarah came by after school. She stood on my porch like she wasn't sure she belonged there. A 17-year-old with one shoelace untied and a notebook pressed against her chest. When I opened the door, she gave me the smallest smile. "Can I come in, Grandma?" I stepped aside, and she walked in like a guest. Not like the little girl who once spilled juice on my carpet and cried until I promised it didn't matter. We sat in the living room. She didn't ask for tea, so I made her some anyway. She held the mug with both hands but didn't drink. "I read your letter," she said after a while. I nodded. "Did it scare you?" Number it made me feel weird, like I never really thought about you as a person before. That made me laugh softly. That's fair. Most people don't think about their grandparents as full people. We just appear. She shifted on the couch. "Mom said it was dramatic, that you were trying to make everyone feel guilty." I raised my eyebrows. "Do you think that?" She paused. "Number, I think you were telling the truth." I sat back, studying her. There was something in her voice, something steady, curious, kind. "You're the only one who asked to come back," I said. "I wanted to understand," she replied. "I keep thinking about that moment when you opened your gift. I laughed too, but then I saw your face and I felt awful. I didn't know what to do, so I did nothing. But now, I just wanted to say I'm sorry." It wasn't forced. It wasn't rehearsed. Just a sentence, soft and clear. "I accept that," I said. She let out a breath and smiled. Then, from her bag, she pulled out her notebook. She opened to a page near the back and turned it toward me. "Can I read you something?" I nodded. She read a short poem about age and time and hands that held too much without complaint, about what it means to be invisible in a room full of family, and about a letter that made her see again. When she finished, I didn't speak right away, but I reached across the couch and took her hand. She didn't pull away, and that silence, that shared, warm silence, was the beginning of something neither of us had the words for yet. That evening, after Sarah left, I walked down the hallway to the room no one ever really visited, my sewing room, my quiet place. Once it was filled with fabrics, spools of thread, scraps of dresses I used to make for her mother. Now it mostly sat still, full of memories stacked neatly in drawers. I flicked on the lamp. Dust danced in the glow like snow caught in a lazy wind. The old Singer sewing machine still sat proudly by the window, a framed photo of me and my husband, from our younger years, watched over the room like a silent promise. It wasn't just a sewing room. It was where I grieved, where I planned birthday parties, where I mended school uniforms and stitched tears into quilts. It was where I kept pieces of myself they never noticed. I opened a drawer and pulled out a box, not like the one I'd given them. This one was smaller, older. Inside were folded letters, yellowed with time. Letters I wrote to myself over the years, little notes I never sent, words I needed to say when no one was listening. I read one. "You are not invisible. They just stopped looking. But you, my dear, are still the heartbeat of this house." It made me smile. The box also held old report cards, Mother's Day cards from when they still drew with crayons, and one particularly worn envelope labeled, "For when they forget who I was." That one I left unopened. Sometimes it's enough just to remember that you remember. I stood in that room for a long time, and I realized it didn't hurt anymore. The laughter from that birthday, it had faded. Not because they'd erased it, but because something better had begun to take its place. Truth, awareness, care. They were seeing me again, not as the punchline, not as the old woman in the corner, but as the one who had built the very foundation they stood on. Before I turned off the light, I left the door slightly ajar. Let them come in one day. Let them see what I never showed. Because sometimes the quietest room in the house holds the loudest pieces of your soul, and I wasn't hiding anymore. Sunday dinners had become a tradition again, a new one. The old rhythm was broken after my birthday. And I wasn't sorry for it. Sometimes the breaking is the only way you can hear what needs to be rebuilt. This time, they all came early. My daughter-in-law brought a casserole she hadn't burned, which was progress. My son asked if I needed help in the kitchen. Twice. The grandchildren didn't vanish into their phones the moment they walked in. Even the littlest ones seemed softer, like they were following a new script they didn't fully understand yet, but knew they wanted to get right. I watched them all move around my home as if for the first time, carefully, aware. No one mentioned the diapers. No one dared. But there was something else in the air now. Not guilt, but something deeper, a kind of searching. Dinner was quiet at first. Then slowly they began to talk, but not at me, with me. My daughter asked what my favorite book was growing up. My grandson asked what I used to do before I became a mother. The first time anyone had asked me that in years. I used to paint, I said. Watercolors. I wasn't very good, but I loved the silence of it. Sarah perked up. Do you still have your paintings? I nodded. A few, in the attic. I could show you. She smiled like it was a treasure map I'd handed her. That night, the conversation flowed like it hadn't in decades, and I realized something simple, something quiet. They were trying. It didn't erase the past, but it softened it. Their effort was real. Their eyes stayed on me longer. Their laughter didn't sting anymore. It was laughter with, not at. When dessert was done and the dishes were drying, my son lingered in the kitchen while everyone else drifted into the living room. I know it's late, he said, but thank you for the letter, Mom. It woke me up. I looked at him, this grown man I once held through fevers and nightmares, and said, I've been waiting for years for you to open your eyes. I'm just glad you finally did. And this time, the silence that followed was full of peace. The next morning, I took out an old photo album, not one of the glossy ones they flip through at holidays, but the cloth-bound book with fraying corners and pages that crackle when turned. It had sat untouched for too long. I laid it gently on the coffee table, right in the center of the room where they couldn't ignore it. By evening, Sarah returned. She didn't come alone this time. Her younger brother trailed behind her, fidgeting with the sleeves of his hoodie. She said they just wanted to stop by. I could tell by her eyes she meant something more. Can we look through your old photos? She asked. I didn't answer. I simply opened the album to the first page, a photo of me in front of my first apartment, a baby on my hip, sunlight in my hair. Is that Mom? Her brother asked. No, Sarah said. That's Grandma. He leaned closer. She looks happy. I laughed. I was. That was the day your grandfather and I bought our first couch. Second-hand, but it felt like luxury. They listened, wide-eyed, as I told stories. Stories I hadn't thought anyone would want to hear anymore. How I used to sew dresses out of curtains. How I once sold pies door to door during a strike. How we had nothing. But I never let them go to bed hungry. The kids were quiet, soaking it in like something they'd never known they were missing. At one point, Sarah touched a photo of me holding her mother as a baby. She never told us you looked like this. People forget, I said, that their parents had lives before them. That their grandparents did too. Her eyes lingered on the image. I don't want to forget. I closed the album gently. Then don't, I said. Ask, listen, be curious. She nodded, serious in a way few 17-year-olds ever are. That night, they didn't just visit. They stayed. We made popcorn, watched an old movie. They laughed at the wrong parts, fell asleep on the couch, their heads resting against one another like they'd always belonged there. And as I covered them with a quilt I had sewn 30 years ago, I realized sometimes the best part of growing older is watching them finally grow up. The next day, I went into the garage, not for tools or paint or anything useful, but for the box I had buried in the far corner, beneath blankets and rusted garden shears. A simple cardboard box, taped shut, labeled in shaky handwriting, "Not yet." It was dusty, dented, forgotten by everyone but me. I carried it inside, slow and careful, like it might fall apart if I moved too quickly. I placed it on the kitchen table and stared at it for a while. My hands hesitated on the tape, the way one does before opening a door they're not sure they're ready to walk through. But I was ready. Inside were pieces of myself. Letters I never sent. Birthday cards I wrote but didn't give. Newspaper clippings from my youth. My first poem written in high school. A music sheet from the piano recital I skipped because I got cold feet. A lock of my mother's hair wrapped in silk. A napkin with a note my husband once left. Don't forget to smile today. You're still the most beautiful woman in the world. Memories. Yes. But more than that. Truths I had stored away, waiting for someone to ask who I was before I became just Grandma. Later that afternoon, Sarah came by again. She had a notebook under one arm and her hair tied up messily like she'd been writing for hours. She sat at the table, opened her book, then paused when she saw the box. "What's that?" "A time machine," I said with a smile. She blinked. "Want to open it?" She did, carefully, reverently. Together, we sifted through the contents. She read my poem twice, then asked if she could keep a copy. She held the music sheet like it was fragile glass. "You were so much more than I knew," she whispered. "I still am," I said gently. She looked at me, really looked, and I saw something in her face change. It wasn't pity. It wasn't shock. It was respect, the kind that isn't owed, only earned. That night, she helped me sort the contents into new folders, labeled in her neat handwriting: childhood, marriage, dreams, someday. And when she left, she kissed my cheek without a word, because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones no one knew you carried. Sunday came again. The house filled slowly this time. No rushing, no shouting, just the soft clatter of shoes at the door, low conversation in the hallway, the smell of something baking in the oven. Not mine, but Sarah's. She brought a pie. It sagged in the middle and the crust was too thick, but it was beautiful in its own way, like her effort had weight. She beamed when I said so. Everyone gathered around the table, a little closer than usual. They waited for me to sit first. A small thing, but I noticed. Halfway through the meal, my son tapped his glass and cleared his throat, the way he used to before making a toast. "I know we usually do this on birthdays," he said, "but I want to say something." He looked down, then at me. "Mom, we laughed that day because we thought we were being funny, lighthearted. We didn't see you. Not really. But after everything you've reminded us of, through your letter, your stories, and just being who you are, yet we know better now. I know better now. I know." He paused. "You've given us everything, and we've been blind to it. I'm sorry for that. And I want to change that, starting today." Silence, but not the uncomfortable kind, the kind that wraps around a moment to protect it. Then Sarah stood. She held something behind her back, a box, small and neatly wrapped, a bow tied just right. "This is from all of us," she said. I opened it slowly. Inside was a leather-bound book, blank pages, heavy, waiting. On the first page, in Sarah's handwriting, it read, "To Grandma. For the stories you haven't told yet, we're ready to listen now." My fingers trembled slightly as I touched the page. I looked up at them. My children, my grandchildren, the generations I had poured myself into, and I smiled, not because of the gift, but because they had finally understood. I wasn't finished. My story wasn't over. It was just beginning a new chapter, one they were finally ready to read. That evening, after they left, I walked into my bedroom, the one room no one ever entered without knocking. It wasn't out of fear, just a quiet agreement. Some places in a home are sacred. There was an old dresser in the corner, its wood faded, handles worn smooth from decades of use. The bottom drawer had always been locked, not because I was hiding anything scandalous, but because I wasn't ready to let anyone else hold those memories until now. I knelt slowly and pulled out the tiny brass key I kept in my nightstand. It clicked softly, a sound I hadn't heard in years. I slid the drawer open and stared down at the pieces of a life I had almost forgotten I'd lived. There was a dusty jewelry box filled with brooches I hadn't worn since my husband passed, a cassette tape labeled in shaky handwriting, "Our Song, 1972", a folded letter from my own grandmother, yellowed but intact, and a small velvet pouch that held my wedding ring, the one I stopped wearing when the arthritis in my fingers made it too tight. I sat there on the carpet, surrounded by the past, not grieving it, just acknowledging it. And then I heard a soft knock. Sarah. She peeked her head in, her voice unsure. I left my notebook. "Come in," I said. "I'm just visiting old friends." She stepped inside and her eyes went straight to the drawer. "You unlocked it?" I nodded. "I think it's time." She knelt beside me and picked up the cassette. "What's this?" "Our Song," I said with a smile. "We used to dance to it every Sunday in the kitchen." She turned the tape over in her hands like it was a rare artifact. "Can we listen to it?" I pulled an old player from the shelf and pressed the tape in. Static, then soft piano, then his voice singing off-key, laughing halfway through. She covered her mouth, smiling. "That's him?" "That's us," I said. And in that moment, that tiny room with its locked drawer now open, I realized something simple, but profound. My life was never too small to matter. It was just waiting for someone to open the drawer and ask. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. The house was still. The kind of stillness that only comes after something shifts. Not a storm, not a fight, but a quiet revelation. The kind you don't speak aloud but carry in your bones. I sat by the kitchen window with a cup of coffee and no sugar, just the way I liked it before they told me it was too bitter. Funny how I used to change small things to make others comfortable, even when it tasted wrong on my own tongue. Outside, the sky was pink with promise. I watched the light creep across the floor and thought about how many mornings I'd sat in that very spot. Thousands, maybe more. And yet this one felt new, different, because now they were listening. Later, my son stopped by, alone again. He didn't bring food or gifts, just himself and something folded in his hand. "I wrote you something," he said, sliding the paper across the table. I unfolded it slowly. A list, memories, one by one. The day I taught him to tie his shoes. The time I drove across town in the rain to bring his forgotten school project. How I held his hand at his first funeral. How I never yelled, even when I probably should have. How I always came back, no matter how tired I was. I looked up. His eyes were red. "I wanted you to know I remember," he said, "even if I never said it." I placed my hand over his. "You just did." No more needed to be said. Later that afternoon, Sarah returned. She didn't ask questions this time. She just brought her sketchbook and sat beside me on the couch. We didn't talk. We didn't need to. She began to draw. My hands, folded neatly in my lap. Every wrinkle, every vein, every line earned. When she was done, she turned the page toward me. At the bottom, in careful handwriting, she'd written, "This is what strength looks like when it grows old." And for the rest of the evening, we sat in silence, not the cold kind, but the kind that holds you, because when love finally finds its voice, sometimes it doesn't have to speak at all. A week passed. The house settled again, not into loneliness, but into something gentler, a rhythm of soft visits, quiet laughter, and a kind of respect that took root like wildflowers, unexpected but welcome. Then came my daughter. She hadn't called. She rarely did. She arrived in a rush, perfume too strong, voice too bright, the way people act when they know they're late for more than just a visit. "I was just passing by," she said, though she held a cake in her hands and a wrapped gift too large for coincidence. I smiled. "Come in." We sat in the living room where the sunlight spilled across the rug. She looked around like everything had changed. Maybe it had. "You look well," she said, sitting stiffly on the edge of the couch. "I feel seen," I replied. She blinked, unsure how to respond. After a few awkward minutes, she handed me the gift. "It's just something small. For last week. I know I missed the dinner. Work, you know." I nodded but didn't open the box. I placed it on the table and poured her tea instead. "I didn't write a letter," she added quickly. "I figured you'd had enough of those." "I didn't ask for letters," I said gently. "I just wanted honesty." She shifted uncomfortably. Then, softly, like peeling off something she'd worn too long, she said, "I didn't think you'd notice I wasn't there. You always looked like you didn't need anyone." That surprised me. For a moment, I couldn't find the words. "I needed you," I said finally, but I got used to the silence. She looked down at her hands. "I don't know how to fix it." "You don't have to fix anything," I replied. "You just have to show up." We sat for a while, sipping tea, the air between us no longer heavy, just real. When she left, I opened her gift. A photo album, empty pages, a note inside. "Maybe it's not too late to start remembering the right way." I traced the cover with my fingers, and for the first time in a very long time I believed her, because some birthdays are marked with candles, and some with the quiet return of someone you thought you'd lost. It had been years since I'd climbed the stairs to the attic. The boards creaked under my weight like old friends complaining softly but not resisting. The air was thick with dust, memories caught in cobwebs and boxes marked in fading ink. Most people think attics hold junk: broken lamps, forgotten toys, holiday decorations, missing pieces. But mine was different. Mine held proof of who I was, who I had been before Mom and Grandma became my only names. I moved slowly past crates of winter coats and boxes of ornaments until I found the one I was looking for, labeled in black marker, Evelyn Before. Inside, I found my paintbrushes. Dried, yes, but not ruined. And beneath them, rolled canvases, carefully wrapped in tissue, yellowed at the edges. I carried them down, heart beating fast. The dining room table became an art gallery. One by one, I unrolled the paintings: a self-portrait from my 20s, a watercolor of the park where my husband proposed, a stormy seascape I painted during a miscarriage no one knew about, a bright field of flowers I made the day I found out I was going to be a grandmother. Each painting held a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Later that evening, Sarah came by again. She froze in the doorway when she saw the table. "Did you paint all these?" "I did," I said softly. She walked around the table slowly, her eyes wide. "Why didn't you show anyone?" "No one ever asked who I was before I was theirs." She stopped at the stormy seascape, her fingers hovering near the edge. "This one feels sad." It was, but painting it saved me. She looked at me then, truly looked, like she just met someone entirely new. "Can I help hang them?" she asked. And that night we turned the hallway into a gallery. We used old frames from the garage, and she insisted on labeling each one with little handwritten notes. Summer '67, the proposal, when no one knew. The house changed that night, not just because of the paintings, but because every time they walked down that hallway, they would see me. Not just Grandma, not just a woman who wrote a letter, but Evelyn, a girl who lived, who painted, who grieved, who loved, and who finally took her name back. The phone rang just after breakfast, not the cell phone with its sharp tone and too many unknown numbers. The landline, beige and old, the one they all teased me for keeping. I always said it knew how to hold a voice better. I answered, expecting a telemarketer, or maybe the neighbor's son asking about his lost cat again. But it was my lawyer. "Mrs. Hamilton," he said, polite and cautious. "I've prepared the new version of your will, as discussed. Would you like to come by and review it?" I glanced at the calendar, 1 year to the day since that birthday. "Yes," I said. "It's time." After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table and looked out the window. The yard was quiet. The rose bush had bloomed early this year. Defiant little flowers, just like me. They thought I didn't notice. The way they hovered, curious about what I might have changed. After that letter, after the dinner, after the gifts and silence and tears. But I had said nothing. Until now. That afternoon, I visited the office. Neat folders, sharp pens, a room that smelled like leather and quiet decisions. We went through it line by line. I didn't rush. Every word mattered. My money wouldn't just be split by blood. I added names they'd never expect. The nurse who held my hand after my surgery, the neighbor who brought soup every winter, even the librarian who once helped me find a book I hadn't read since childhood. I left something for each grandchild, but only what I knew they would value. Not always money, sometimes just a letter, a memory, a reminder. And as for Sarah, she got the house. Not out of spite, not to make a point, but because she had seen me, truly, fully, before anyone else thought to look. When I returned home, I placed one copy of the new will in the same box that once held all my silent letters. Then I wrote one more note. To be opened only when you wonder why. If you're reading this, then maybe, just maybe, you're finally ready to understand. Because sometimes the truest gift isn't what you leave behind. It's what you choose to give when no one's expecting it. It wasn't planned. It never is with these things. They were cleaning out the hall closet, a rare burst of energy from my son who claimed he was finally helping around the house. Sarah followed close behind, arms full of winter coats I hadn't worn in years. Then came the voice. "Grandma, what's this?" I turned. In her hands, the box, the one labeled, "For when you wonder why." I froze for just a moment, then nodded. "You can open it." They sat on the couch together, the others slowly joining as curiosity pulled them in. I stayed standing, watching. Inside, a single envelope. Thick, yellowed edges, my handwriting on the front. Sarah opened it and began to read. If you're reading this, it means you've stopped laughing long enough to listen. It means you've wondered, really wondered, who I am, not just what I did for you. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. I was a mother before I was a grandmother. I had dreams before I was your caretaker. I cried in silence. I danced barefoot in kitchens. I lost friends, family, love, and kept going. They were silent now. Even my son didn't shift in his seat. "You gave me diapers for my 80th birthday. You thought it was a joke. You thought I'd forget. But I never forgot who I was. And now, neither will you." Sarah paused. There were tears in her eyes, but she kept reading. "This house is full of pieces of me. Not things, not furniture or paintings, but moments. Look for them, in the quiet, in the corners, in each other." When she finished, no one spoke. The room was heavy, but not with shame, with realization. My son stood slowly. "Mom." I shook my head gently. No need. Because in that moment they saw it. Saw me. Not just as someone who had been, but someone who still was. Sarah stood and walked to me, letter in hand. "This doesn't feel like the end of something," she whispered. I smiled. It's not. It's the part where the silence ends and the story finally begins. And just like that, they knew. Some truths don't need to be shouted. They only need to be heard. A week later, they asked if they could redecorate the hallway. I raised an eyebrow. "Redecorate? Since when do any of you notice the hallway?" Sarah grinned. "Since we realized you've been walking through your memories alone." So I let them. For hours, they carried boxes from the attic, sorted through old drawers, opened albums I hadn't touched in decades. There were oohs and ahs, some tears, even a few sheepish chuckles when they found an old love letter my husband wrote, filled with lines too poetic to read aloud without blushing. By afternoon, the hallway was covered in frames, but not the posed kind. No studio portraits, no forced smiles. These were moments. A black and white photo of me laughing in the garden, hair wild and hands covered in soil. A candid shot of me painting near the window, unaware of the camera. A tiny photo of me and my best friend in 1958, sharing a milkshake and dreaming about Paris. At the very center, they placed one frame with no photo. Just a handwritten note in Sarah's careful script, the rest of her story is still being written. I stood there, staring at it, something tight in my chest, loosening slowly. That evening, they made dinner. They argued over the salt and burned the garlic bread. I didn't mind. They tried. After we ate, my son brought out a camera. "Can we take a photo of you?" he asked. "Only if you don't make me pose," I replied. He didn't. He caught me mid-laugh, head tilted back, eyes closed, the same way my husband once had. The next morning, the frame with the note was replaced. Now it held that photo, and under it, Sarah added one more line. She is not just who she was. She is still becoming. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to, because in that hallway, every time I passed, I saw proof that they finally understood. I was never just a background character in their lives. I was the story they'd never taken time to read. And now, finally, they'd begun turning the pages. In every home, there's a chair no one else sits in. Mine was by the window. A faded blue cushion, armrests worn smooth from years of tea, knitting, and quiet thoughts. No one ever asked to sit there. It was understood. That was Grandma's chair. But now, Sarah sat in it. Not like someone who'd forgotten, like someone keeping it warm. I entered the room and smiled. "You're in my spot." She looked up, not flustered at all. "I know. I wanted to feel what you see every morning." She turned her gaze back to the view. The backyard garden, the fence I painted myself, the trees that held secrets from generations. "I never noticed how peaceful it is from here," she whispered. I sat across from her on the little ottoman no one used anymore. "It's where I remember who I am before the day gets noisy." She nodded. "Can I sit here sometimes?" I smiled. "You already are." A few minutes passed without words, just birds outside, the hum of the heater and the kind of silence that doesn't press. It holds. Then she spoke again. "Do you think people ever really see their families for who they are?" I thought for a long time before answering. Not at first, sometimes not even for years, but then something shifts. Someone listens, and if you're lucky, they never stop. She reached into her bag and pulled out a notebook, the one she'd been carrying for weeks. "I've been writing everything down," she said. "All your stories, your voice, your expressions. I want to make sure I never forget." I felt something warm bloom in my chest. "You won't," I said softly, "because you're choosing to remember now." She looked at me with those wide, bright eyes. "Do you think I'll be like you when I'm older?" I reached across and took her hand. "I hope you're even more. But if you ever need a reminder." I nodded toward the hallway. "I've left the map." And as we sat there side by side, I realized something quietly beautiful. That chair wasn't just mine anymore. It was a place where stories began again. In new voices, on blank pages, under the same light I had always trusted to tell the truth. They came over again on a Sunday. But this time, no one brought balloons, no jokes, no oversized greeting cards that played music when opened. It was quiet, intentional. The table was already set when I walked into the dining room. My son stood at the head of it, hands folded, eyes soft. Sarah had placed a single daffodil in a vase, my favorite, though I'd never told her that aloud. I took my seat slowly, noticing the absence before I noticed anything else. There was no laughter, not because there was sadness, because they had finally learned to listen first. Dinner was slow, unhurried. They asked about my garden, about the books I used to love, about the names of people in old photographs. They didn't rush to interrupt, didn't glance at phones or speak over each other. It was as if they knew this wasn't just a meal, it was a restoration. After dessert, a homemade apple crumble, a little too sweet, Sarah brought in a small wrapped package. No card, no joke. Just my name in simple black ink. I opened it carefully. Inside was a framed page, handwritten in Sarah's neat print. At the top, what you taught me. A list. That silence isn't always emptiness. That a soft voice can still carry truth. That growing old doesn't mean fading. That forgiveness isn't weakness. That being seen is the greatest gift. I ran my fingers across the words. No one spoke. No one needed to. They were learning, not just who I was, but who they wanted to be, because of me. When I stood to say goodnight, my son hugged me longer than usual. "You were never invisible," he said quietly. "We just forgot how to look." I smiled, my voice steady. "And now?" He met my eyes. "Now we don't look away." That night, as I placed the framed list beside my bed, I realized something simple, something powerful. I had spent a lifetime giving, but now, finally, they were giving something back, not in gifts, not in grand gestures, but in presence, in patience, in paying attention, and after 80 years of being a background hum in their lives, they had finally tuned in to the melody. There was one last thing I hadn't shown them. It wasn't hidden. Not really. Just tucked away behind the linen shelf in the hallway closet beneath a stack of towels no one ever touched. A small wooden box, plain and unmarked. Inside were scraps, not valuables, not heirlooms, but little pieces of me. A pressed flower from my wedding bouquet. A movie ticket from the night I saw Gone with the Wind for the first time. A button from my daughter's baby sweater. A folded napkin with my husband's doodles on it from a cafe in 1964. A receipt from the last road trip we took as a family, when no one realized it would be the last. I hadn't opened that box in years. I was almost afraid to. But something in me said, now. Now is the time. So I took it out. The next day I invited them all over, but I didn't say why, just wear something comfortable and don't be late. They came, curious, cautious. I had already laid everything out on the dining table, not organized, not explained, just there, waiting to be seen. "What is this?" Sarah asked, her fingers brushing the napkin with the doodle. I didn't answer immediately. I let them wander, pick up, guess, wonder. After a long silence, I finally spoke. "These are pieces of a life. Not the loud parts, not the ones you frame or post or brag about, just the quiet ones, the ones that make you, even when no one's watching." They said nothing, until my son spoke. "This is you," he said, eyes glassy. "All the parts we missed." I nodded. "It's not your fault. I didn't always share them. Maybe I thought they wouldn't matter to anyone but me." "They matter now," Sarah whispered. We spent the evening building a memory wall, not with paint or frames, but with meaning. They wrote down what each item meant, in their own words, what they thought it said about who I was. And when it was finished, we stood there, all of us, quiet, humbled, not by grief, not by guilt, but by awe. Because they hadn't just seen the life I lived. They had finally honored it. And in that simple act, I knew I would never be invisible again. On the morning of my 81st birthday, I woke up before anyone else. The house was still. Light crept across the floor just like it always had. But this time, it touched a different kind of quiet. Not the silence of being forgotten, the peace of being understood. I brewed my coffee, no sugar, and sat in my chair by the window. Outside, the garden had begun to bloom again, as if even the flowers had waited for this moment. The doorbell rang just past 9. It wasn't a surprise. I knew they would come. But I didn't know they would come like this. No balloons, no music cards, no jokes in poor taste. Just smiles. Real ones. Sarah was the first to enter. She carried a box wrapped in brown paper and tied with a ribbon made of old newspaper. "It's from all of us," she said softly. I opened it slowly, the way you open something you know will matter. Inside, a book, hand-bound. The cover read, her name was Evelyn. I traced the letters with my fingertips. Inside were my stories, all of them. The hallway frames, the attic paintings, the dinner lists, the garden, the box of scraps, even the silence. Page after page, in their handwriting, in their voices. Every chapter began with a moment they had once overlooked and ended with how they saw it now. By the time I reached the final page, I could hardly read through the tears. At the bottom, in Sarah's hand, "You gave us a home, a name, a story. Now we give it back to you." In full color. I looked up. They were watching me, not nervously, but with the same quiet respect you give a sunrise. I stood slowly, the book in my hands, and then I said only this: "You didn't just remember me. You rewrote the ending." They moved closer, arms wrapping around me, not to protect me, not out of guilt, but out of love. Real, earned, undeniable. And as we stood there, I realized the final gift wasn't the book. It wasn't the hallway or the photos or the tears. It was this: the moment when a woman becomes more than a memory. She becomes legacy, and I had lived long enough to witness mine. A week after my birthday, I returned to the garden. It had always been mine. Not in the way people claim space, but in the way roots claim earth. My hands had touched every inch of that soil. I planted with hope. I trimmed with sorrow. I watered with silence. This time, I brought Sarah with me. She carried a small trowel, still learning the language of the earth. I handed her gloves, the good ones, the ones I never let anyone else wear. "We're going to plant something new," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" I opened my hand. Inside, a paper packet, aged and soft. "Forget-me-nots. I've been saving them." We knelt beside the empty patch, the place where nothing ever seemed to grow, until now. As we worked, the silence between us felt full instead of empty. Sarah looked up. "You used to do this alone?" I nodded. "For years. But it wasn't really loneliness. It was remembering." She pressed a seed into the soil with quiet reverence. "Can I help it remember too?" That simple question broke something open in me. "You already are." We stayed until the sun dipped low, our hands dirty, our hearts lighter. The garden didn't look different, but it felt different, as if the ground had finally exhaled. That night, I dreamed of blue petals blooming overnight. And in that dream, I wasn't alone. I found it in the bottom drawer of my old writing desk, an envelope, unsealed, addressed to my younger self. I must have written it decades ago, maybe in a moment of grief or strength, or both. I unfolded the letter with care. The ink had faded, but not the words. "Dear Evelyn, they will forget. They will overlook. You will give everything and some days feel like nothing, but do not let that turn you bitter. You are more than they see. Keep writing. Keep painting. Keep laughing when no one does. One day they'll come back, not with apologies, with awareness. And on that day, hold your head high. You didn't disappear. You endured." I read it 3 times. Then I smiled, folded it, and placed it in a new envelope. This one addressed simply, "To the next woman who thinks she's fading." I left it in the hallway drawer just beneath the framed list Sarah had written. Someone would find it one day, because every story begins again, and this time, it wouldn't take 80 years to be heard.